Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want you to imagine this scenario. It's Sunday and it's 1 o'clock on the East Coast. You're sitting down on the couch with your buddies and with food and drinks by your side, and you're getting ready to watch the final Sunday of the regular season. And you're getting ready to watch all the drama unfold as by the end of the day, you know who's going to be competing in the playoffs. Life is good. And you turn on one of the networks, let's say Fox, to watch the early game. And there's nothing on. There's no football on for some reason. 3 hours later, you try again when it's 4 o'clock, and you try to turn on Fox to watch the late game. And once again, there's nothing on. You have no idea what happened or why it was the case, but one of the networks just didn't televise any games at all. And the reason why they didn't televise anything? They forgot. They made such an error that even though they were supposed to televise one of the games, they wound up televising none of them. It's almost impossible to believe that a network just forgets to televise an NFL game and makes an error that egregious. Yet as ridiculous and as stupid as that sounds, during the final week of the 1982 season, that's exactly what happened. If you were in Detroit and you were looking forward to watching NBC and their coverage of the AFC on the last day of the season, too bad, because they forgot to show a game. And this is the story behind the catastrophe and one of the dumbest broadcasting decisions in NBC history. Before I talk about the debacle in question, we need some context to understand the scenario that led us to this point, as well as how the NFL broadcasting rules worked back in the early 80s. And to fully tell this story, we have to talk about the Detroit Lions, because none of this happens if it wasn't for the Lions. In Week 9, the Lions were set to play at home against the Green Bay Packers to close out the regular season. However, the game was not a sellout, as the game came nowhere close to filling up the seats at the Pontiac Silverdome. There were 3 factors that contributed to this. Number 1, you had the capacity of the Silverdome. The Pontiac Silverdome was one of the largest venues in the NFL, holding over 80,000 spectators. For any NFL team to sell out 80,000 seats on a weekly basis is going to be a daunting task, and especially for the Lions in 1982 because of the other 2 reasons we're going to dive into, it was borderline impossible. Number 2, the Lions were not a good team at all. Entering the final week of this abbreviated 1982 season, they were 3-5, guaranteed to finish with a losing record. They were also picking seemingly the worst time of the year to play their worst football, as even though things started off promising with a 2-0 record before the strike, they dropped 5 of their next 6 coming out of the work stoppage, including all 3 of their home games in that stretch. If you looked at every team in the NFC and their record in the first 6 weeks after the strike ended, you'd find that the Lions were at the bottom in terms of the worst performing teams. In fact, of the 14 teams in the NFC, the Lions were tied with the Rams for the fewest wins after the strike. And number 3, as you probably were able to tell by now, there was a giant strike that stopped the season for 2 months. I've talked about the strike at length in a previous video of mine, so if you want to learn more about the finer details of what happened, click the card in the upper right corner. But after any sort of lengthy work stoppage like that, the feeling of fans toward the league and the players sours, and it's tough to get fans back into the seats right away. We saw this heavily in 1982, when the average attendance dropped by more than 2,000 fans per game, and when tons of games failed to sell out. And this was especially true in Detroit, where the fans were not exactly eager to come back to the Silverdome after a work stoppage to watch a team that was not very good. In 1981, the Lions averaged 75,658 fans per game. Through their first 4 home games in 1982, however, that number dropped by over 3,000 fans. And it was even worse for their home finale against the Packers, where only 64,377 tickets were sold, making the game a far cry from a sellout. Because of this, their game was going to be blacked out on CBS in the Detroit area. And that's where the true madness begins. There are 5 key rules regarding broadcasts back in 1982 that apply in this situation, and that make this drama all the crazier. I dove in depth about the 5 rules in a previous video of mine, so while I'll discuss it, I'm not going to go as in depth in this one as I did before. However, if you want to learn more about those 5 rules, click the card in the upper right corner. Number 1, only one network per week got assigned a doubleheader, meaning that one network would get to show 2 games, and one network would only get to show 1 game. For the final week of the 1982 season, it was CBS's turn to get the doubleheader. Number 2, even if you had the doubleheader, you could not show a doubleheader if the team in your home market was playing at home. In other words, if the Lions were on the road or were playing on a different night, like a Thursday or a Monday, then whichever network had the doubleheader in Detroit had free reign to show 2 games. However, if the Lions were at home, then the doubleheader network could only show 1 game. This was the case during the final week of the 1982 season, as the Lions were playing at home. Number 3, even though you had to show the team in your home market no matter what if the game got sold out, if the game was not sold out, then you could not show that game. Here, the Lions were playing at the Silverdome in a venue that was 75% full, and was nowhere close to a sellout, so CBS could not air the Lions-Packers game in Detroit because of this blackout rule. Now, there were some moments in 1982 that the rule got waived, mainly the first week coming back from the strike and Thanksgiving, but that did not apply here. Number 4, there had to be 6 continuous hours of football on at all times. In other words, you couldn't have CBS and NBC both showing an early game and neither network showing a later game. And number 5, and perhaps most importantly, if the home team was blacked out, then the doubleheader network could show whatever game they wanted to, and the other network had to comply. In other words, because CBS could only show one game that week, and because they couldn't show the Lions game, they could choose whether they wanted the early time slot or the late time slot, and then NBC would be forced to air a game in the opposite time slot. I'll use Eastern time since that's what Detroit operates on. If the CBS affiliate in Detroit wanted the 4 o'clock game, then NBC had to air a 1 o'clock game by default. And for the final week of the season, it was very clear as to which game CBS wanted if they couldn't show the hometown Lions play. They wanted the 4 o'clock battle in the NFC West between the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. On paper, this doesn't seem like that attractive of a matchup. The Rams were 1-7 and were the worst team in the NFC, and had the worst defense in football, having given up a whopping 230 points when no other team in the conference allowed even 200 points. And the 49ers, even though they were the defending Super Bowl champions, were highly disappointing and were posting one of the worst seasons by any defending champion in NFL history, as they were 3-5 and had lost all 4 home games played at Candlestick Park thus far. CBS had all the NFC games to choose from, including games between playoff teams like Washington and St. Louis. And this is the game they chose? A game where the two teams have won a combined 25% of their games so far this season? Why? Well, when you break it down, the decision by CBS makes a ton of sense. Before I talk about the controversy, we have to first ask ourselves the obvious question. Why did CBS, with every NFC game at their disposal since the Lions game was blacked out, want to air this game over every other game? There were 2 reasons. Number 1, that was the only available CBS game in the later window. And even though the Lions game was blacked out, you still had 64,000 people who would be going to the game and would be away from their TV sets, along with the others who would be listening on the radio. Unless it's a market with 2 heavy fan presences, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to compete against the hometown team, especially if you don't have to. But number 2, and perhaps most importantly, this game had massive implications on the Lions. As awful as the Lions were in 1982, and trust me, especially after the strike, they were awful. They were still in the playoff hunt, and were very much alive in that race. Remember that in 1982, because the league had no idea what it was doing and decided to throw in a complete sham of a season, 8 teams in each conference made the playoffs, meaning that 16 teams out of 28 were going to be fighting in the Super Bowl tournament. And if the Lions beat the Packers, then they would be in the playoffs as long as the Rams could defeat the 49ers. There was also a scenario involving the Lions getting in if they won and the Bears beat the Buccaneers, but that is irrelevant for the purposes of this story. Bottom line, if the Lions won, then the game everyone in the city would be focused on was the Rams-49ers contest, because that was going to determine whether or not the Lions were playing in the postseason for the first time since 1970, and for just the second time since they won the NFL championship back in 1957. When you put it like that, it's very obvious why CBS wanted to air the 49ers-Rams game at the 4 o'clock slot. So with CBS choosing to air the 49ers-Rams game, what game was NBC going to air? They were going to air maybe the best game of the week on paper. They were going to air the battle between arguably the 2 best teams in the AFC. And we're going to air the bitter and heated divisional rivalry between the Los Angeles Raiders and the San Diego Chargers. Right off the bat, when I say Raiders-Chargers, something should seem off. Don't get me wrong, it is a fantastic game on paper. But when's the last time you saw a Chargers-Raiders game kick off at 1 o'clock Eastern? Meaning that it would be 10 o'clock in the morning over on the West Coast. And that's because, well, it wasn't kicking off in the early slot. It was kicking off in the late slot, meaning that the NBC affiliate for Detroit, possibly under the ridiculous assumption that the Lions game was going to sell out, picked this game and never changed it once they got the news that the Lions game was not selling out and CBS chose the 4 o'clock spot. And if you think that's bad, oh, don't worry. It's about to get a million times worse and more inept. I'm sure NBC's original plan, assuming that the Lions game sold out, was to have the Chargers-Raiders game airing at 4 o'clock. But when the game did not sell out and CBS exercised their right to air the 4 o'clock game, forcing NBC to air a 1 o'clock game instead, You would think that NBC executives would have had something in mind and ready to go, right? Heck, you didn't even have to weigh the options of which game you wanted to show. You literally just needed to pick any game. It's like the Celebrity Jeopardy sketch on SNL where Will Ferrell, just disgusted with how stupid all of the celebrities are, says for Final Jeopardy that all you need to do is write down a number and you win. All NBC had to do here was pick any game, literally any game, that was airing at the 1 o'clock window, and they would be totally fine. They forgot to do that. Not one person that worked for the NBC affiliate in Detroit knew the rules. Not one person opened a newspaper and looked at the TV guide and saw that CBS was airing a late game. So when everyone arrived to work on Sunday, January 2nd, 1983, presumably still hungover from New Year's celebrations because of just how stupid this whole situation was, they all thought there was no problem, and that they were good to go with the airing of the Chargers-Raiders game in the late slot. Only at 3:30, a mere 30 minutes before they thought they were going to go on the air, did someone realize the problem and say, guys, we may be in trouble here. Because at that moment, NBC executives realized that they weren't going to be able to show the Raiders-Chargers game as planned. As a last-ditch effort to try and make sure that a game was on, the network called up CBS executive producer Terry O'Neill to explain the situation. I'm guessing NBC said something along the lines of, "So there was a miscommunication and we kind of forgot to show a game in our assigned time slot in Detroit, so we were wondering, even though we're technically not allowed to do it, and even though you have the doubleheader rights, if we could air a game in the 4 o'clock time slot opposite of yours." And in an incredible display of generosity and kindness, O'Neill put the rivalry between the two networks aside, and was in a giving mood, for his New Year's resolution was to be nicer to everyone and to be more understanding of I'm just kidding, he denied the request pretty bluntly. As O'Neill said after the NBC Detroit station manager would mind if the network aired the Raiders-Chargers game, "Yes, we mind." In other words, NBC was completely screwed here, and they were not going to be allowed to show the game. When you break it down, it's very obvious to see why CBS didn't want NBC airing any game, much less their marquee Chargers-Raiders game with Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen on the call, opposite the 49ers-Rams game. Number one, CBS had no incentive to play nice here. NBC screwed up big time through their carelessness. Why would you willingly allow NBC to potentially snatch ratings and eyeballs from you off of their error? Especially when you might annoy advertisers in the process, since their expected viewership is going to be cut pretty significantly. Number two, Raiders-Chargers was objectively a better game than 49ers-Rams. It was a rematch of the AFC Championship from 2 years before. The two teams boasted two of the top 3 point differentials in the conference and had a combined winning percentage of over 81%. Yes, all the Lions fans would have been hooked on the CBS game between the 49ers and the Rams, but to any non-Lions fans in the area, in all likelihood, they would have been fixated on Raiders-Chargers if given the option. And this was especially true if the Lions lost to the Packers and the game meant nothing. At the time that NBC made the phone call to CBS, the outcome of the Packers-Lions game was still in doubt. The Packers were leading 24-20, so as things stood, the Lions were going to be eliminated from playoff contention. This would have made Rams-49ers an awful matchup for the Detroit area to watch, and would have made them get pummeled in the ratings by NBC. Plus, even if we assume that the whole area roots for the Lions and no one will tune into Chargers-Raiders because of it, what happens if the Rams-49ers game ends early or becomes a blowout? Everyone will flip over to Chargers-Raiders. Plus, think of the precedent that this would set, and think of how disastrous this could be in the long run. Yes, in this case, it seemed like the affiliate in Detroit truly forgot that they were supposed to air a game. But what happens down the line when someone forgets in air quotes to air a game? What happens if a larger market, like New York, is supposed to air a woeful Jets team that is playing for nothing, and CBS conveniently forgets this and wants to air the big game between Dallas and Washington with Madden and Summerall on at the same time? It just sets a horrible precedent that, in the long run, the networks in the NFL do not want to get involved in. Because anything that even has a chance at destroying the opportunity for continuous football from 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock is bad for the game, bad for TV ratings, bad for the fans, and bad for the advertisers. When you combine all of these elements, plus the fact that Detroit had the 7th largest TV market in the country and played a sizable impact on the ratings for each network, it's no surprise that CBS basically told NBC to get lost, and that they dropped the ball. Which meant that at the end of the day, WDIV, the NBC affiliate in Detroit, through sheer incompetence on their end, went the entire final week of the season without televising a single game. If you wanted to see any AFC action that week, or wanted to watch 6 hours of continuous football, tough luck, because you were not able to do so. Understandably, just about everyone involved was furious at this almost unprecedented situation. Because something like this, where a network just seemingly forgets to show an NFL game, seems almost unthinkable. I guess the moral of the story here is that it's important that you know the rules, that you double check everything, and that you make sure that everything is good to go. Because as NBC learned the hard way back at the start of 1983, it's better to show a really bad NFL game than to not even show an NFL game at all. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.